I'm not one of these pessimists who thinks that like AI is going to come and take all of our jobs and, we're all going to be left begging to the robot gods.
What it requires, I think, is education on how to use the tools. Once you have the information machine, the only thing that matters is what question you ask.
The opportunity to be able to build something with a team of one or a team of three that used to take a team of 8 or a team of 10 to be able to build in minutes to hours.
Oh my God, if I had 20 people in a room who were working in this way, the amount of work that could get done would be insane.
The idea that it's a measure of status, the number of people who work for you. And then you manage or lead a team that has over 100 people in it, and you realize, oh my God, this is like the worst curse that I could have ever asked for.
Welcome back to Learning to Scale. I'm your host, Max Thilén. This kicks off a special 3-part series with Dave Sifry, founder of Technorati and WarmStart. Dave is a veteran tech entrepreneur and a leader who's built products impacting millions at companies like Lyft, Reddit, and Interana. Dave has deep roots in software engineering and product leadership. He's navigated hypergrowth, venture-backed exits, and digital innovation across everything from blog search to generative AI. Today, we're exploring an idea you've probably heard buzzing around, that thanks to AI, we might soon see the first billion-dollar one-person company. But how realistic is that? Dave and I unpack the hype, break down the ground rules of the billion-dollar one-person company, and explore what's genuinely possible in an AI-driven era. So let's get into it.
It's funny that we're going to be talking about this one-person billion-dollar company thing, and we're talking about this, right? Because I'm here being the dinosaur. I'm like, oh, the 22-year-olds are screwed. But to your point, if I'm hearing your point, it's just different, right? They're just going to learn differently. They're going to adapt differently. When I was 22, I needed to have a mentor in a physical space because that was what was available. But even with AI, do you need that anymore? That equivalently motivated young person could just get Super Whisper and go talk to GPT and get all the same advice and guidance. And obviously there'll be delta between lived experience from a human versus what AI will give you. But in terms of raw knowledge acquisition, I guess.
And I think that there'll be a shift. I don't think that AI is ever going to fully replace the human connection. Humans may find themselves in some really interesting places, but we tend to find a way to find things to do and to enjoy ourselves and make ourselves happy, even as we have continued to increase efficiency over time. So I'm not one of these pessimists who thinks that AI is going to come and take all of our jobs and we're all going to be left begging to the robot gods. I think that there are certain things that we need to be really concerned about on a societal level. If the way that we have adapted to this planet is any kind of an indication, with each new technological advance that's occurred, there's been a shift, and then human beings tend to adapt to it. Earlier in their careers, greater neuroplasticity, greater ability to learn new skills that tend to thrive more than the ones who are older, a little bit more set in our ways, have other kinds of responsibilities. And those things can often weigh people down. What has been interesting for me as someone who is Generation X, who is absolutely noticing that there are people in my generation who are what in other fields 10 years ago would have been at the pinnacle of their careers, are finding themselves getting outpaced or losing their jobs, is that there's a real opportunity to reinvent yourself again. But you have to take that perspective. You need to have a certain economic foundation to allow yourself to be reinvented. If you're still living hand to mouth, like this is just going to be an incredibly difficult time. And like, that is a serious sociological issue that we're going to have to deal with as a society. How do we help the folks who are falling through the cracks?
You're getting my gears turning already, or we've hardly even gotten into the episode.
I'm puzzling, right? Like over what are the larger sociological implications going to look like with the advent of AGI. And I have to admit, I don't have the answers. I've been talking to a lot of really smart people who are puzzling over this and very concerned about it. None of us have been able to come out with answers other than the standard trope of, well, there's going to be disruption, and that disruption is going to cause inequalities, and there are going to be people who move ahead and people who get left behind. My biggest fear is that those inequalities will get concentrated even more in a smaller group of individuals and corporations, that it becomes much more winner takes all. And the concern that I have for those kinds of societal ecosystems where things start to look like an inverted pyramid, where there's a tremendous amount of wealth and accumulated power at the top, is that that's a recipe for a lot of social unrest. That's a recipe where you start to realize you can't hire enough armed guards to protect your property from the masses who are angry.
What it requires, I think, is education on how to use the tools. I was having a really interesting conversation with my sister-in-law's boyfriend this weekend, who is sort of ambitious in his career and not in a tech field, a very conventional industry, and is trying to just figure out how can he accelerate his career trajectory. And his mind, I put ChatGPT on the table, put on the voice transcription mode, and told him, okay, explain to me, what resources do you have? Okay, you have a pickup truck, you have this many hours per week. And I start explaining, I prompted it a little bit. When I was younger, I did the Gary V garage selling thing where I would go around the garage sales with eBay in my hand and I sell stuff. I told ChatGPT, the mission here is to find a way to scale to $1 million in 12 months. This is kind of a basic thing. Like anyone could do this. And in our world on sort of X or LinkedIn, you see these kinds of posts a lot. But the point is, he had never seen these kinds of posts. And that's a very basic example. But going back to my POV, I think it just comes down to education. I think it's just a matter of helping people understand what these tools can mean in a more egalitarian way. If information is now available to everybody, there's some delta if you have the $200 ChatGPT plan versus the free ChatGPT plan. But those two plans are closer to one another than not having AI versus having AI. Once you have the information machine, the only thing that matters is what question you ask. And then it's just a matter of teaching people how to ask the right question. Massive oversimplification, of course.
It's a great point. Am I more optimistic than I have been in the last 20 years, barring so many different external events that are going on right now? I am. I actually am. I think that the extraordinary opportunity, especially as you watch this pendulum swinging away from large organizations of many people who are necessary to make significant change, back to much smaller, nimble groups of people who are able to have enormous impact. Some of that is because of AI. I don't remember seeing a time of opportunity like this since when I saw the web browser for the first time. The opportunity to be able to build something with a team of one or a team of three that used to take a team of 8 or a team of 10 to be able to build in minutes to hours what used to take days or weeks to do. Like, this is extraordinary, and it's broad. It's something that will affect every single business process. The change towards really automating white collar work hasn't been seen since we moved from client server and green screens to a web-based interface where you could go anywhere and interact with anyone in the world. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. I'm going to do the most rehearsed part of this, which is the intro on the on the tape so that we can segue into it, because I do want to get to the fun part of it. This has already been fun, but I want to get to the billion-dollar company part. Dave, I've really been looking forward to this, and it's always a blast when we get to connect, so thanks for joining me.
It is an extraordinary opportunity, Max, and such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
What first drew you into entrepreneurship?
For me, I've never been the smartest or the most competitive or the best salesperson or the most amazing orator. There was something really interesting about combining all of those things. It started when I was a little kid, and I would throw myself into reading and fantasy and building these worlds in my head. When I got a computer for the first time when I was 9 years old, there was this opportunity to take all of that intellectual fantasy life and make the computer do what I wanted it to do. Incredibly powerful feeling. When I turned 15 or 16, and all of a sudden, like puberty hits in a major way, and you're like, wow, there are all these interesting people out there that I'd love to get to know better. I found that I loved being able to interact with people. And even more importantly, I found out that I loved helping them to solve the problems they had. There were grownups who had big problems that they couldn't solve on their own. And they were willing to talk to a high school student and give me 10 times what I was making flipping burgers at McDonald's back then. And I'll tell you, your hair smells a lot better at the end of the day when you're not standing over a fry machine and you're getting paid $50 an hour to do computer consulting. So I got hooked when I was 16. Number one, it was something that I enjoyed doing. There's an intellectual problem solving and puzzle piece to it. Number two, understanding and talking to people about their business problems and what they were trying to solve and what they were trying to automate. And then being able to take that and get paid good money for it, it felt like hitting the lottery. I just knew, okay, this is something that's really exciting for me. So being able to do this for different people and juggle a little bit so that I wasn't doing the same thing all the time really was attractive. I did that through college, and I thought, okay, that was really interesting, but now it's time to get a real job. And I was very lucky. I got an extraordinary opportunity to go and live and work as a professional software engineer for a big Japanese company in Kobe, Japan. And I did that for 3.5 years. That was incredibly interesting and challenging in a whole different way. I got to live in Japan. I got to learn Japanese. I got to meet the woman who is now my wife. And, all of these amazing things happened. But there was one thing that became really clear. Like, I am a terrible cog in a big machine.
If there's any place to learn that, it must be Japan, right?
Woo! And it was amazing to be on the inside, to be working. You're doing gymnastics in the morning and you're wearing the uniform and you've got the pin and everybody looks the same and you're working as part of a team. It was an extraordinary opportunity for somebody right out of college, and I don't regret it for an instant. The greatest compliment that I got at that time was from my boss's boss, who pulled me aside one day and he said, Mr. Sifry, I need to tell you, there's 3 types of people in the world. There's the people who follow rules. There's the people who make rules. And then there's the people like you who make people make new rules. I thought that crystallized things incredibly powerfully, to be able to come and create something that isn't 1 + 1 = 2. I worked on Wall Street for a while. It's great. It's got a lot of that intellectual challenge to it also. But for everybody who wins in a trade, there's somebody who loses. What has always attracted me to the software business and to tech in general is that there's this incredible opportunity when you do it right, that you can make 1 + 1 = 11.
Mm-hmm.
And that extraordinary way to grow the pie while you're also building something useful to a lot of people, that kind of challenge is the most fun in the world. And they happen to pay pretty well for it. So it's a very lucky, fortunate circumstance.
I think you mentioned something about connecting people. Was Technorati your first company or one of your first companies? That was in the blog space, right? So I was curious if that's how you got into that or what that sequence of events was.
So if I recall correctly, Technorati was my fourth company. It wasn't just like me in my garage doing computer consulting, a whatever you want to call it, right? Where we actually took some outside investment and built a company. Technorati was the world's largest blog search engine. This was back in 2004. In the early days of social media, when the idea of having your own MySpace or building your own blog was the height of innovation. The problem most people had was there was no way to find out what was actually going on in the blogosphere. And I had this fundamental insight, which was like, these things are all built by software. What if you could build an engine that sits at the center of it, that every time anybody posts or creates something with their blog, it pings this tool, and then Technorati will go out and immediately index your new post and make it available, even compared to Google, which would take 7 to 10 days for something new to show up at the time. We were indexing and showing real-time information within about 60 seconds from when it was actually posted on the internet. And so it created an enormous amount of suction. There was just a lot of people who were really interested in joining that conversation. And on top of it, it has that additional benefit of building a tool for people with megaphones. We never had a problem getting notoriety or people finding out about us. That was a really powerful business approach that got us a lot of distribution. We built a strong network for those bloggers because there were lots of people who you can imagine, right? We call them influencers today, right? Who needed to have somebody take care of all the business pieces, arbitrate and say, no, this is actually what the audience looks like, work with the big advertisers, provide the right allocation of audience, and then provide the money for the bloggers. That was a really amazing experience. And it taught me so much, not just about how to build a business, but also how businesses grow, because we went from literally me, right, by myself in my basement, like running on 2 old computers that I had bought off of eBay, to over 100 people in under a year.
Wow.
And that kind of extraordinary hypergrowth, it even grew from there. I ran that company for 5 years and then turned it over to a new CEO afterwards, like after we had grown even more. Learning how to manage each of the different kinds of leadership necessary as you grow a team was such a powerful experience for me.
What do you think are the breakpoints in that kind of leadership? Where does it start to get, is it at 10? Is it at 20? Is there a breakpoint at 100? What are the ravines to jump over, so to speak?
Yeah. And I think we can look at a lot of anthropological research here too. There's studies of organizations. You look at things like armies and modern corporations, and they tend to fall into certain kinds of groups. This even goes back to some early work that was done around tribes and tribal communities as well. So take all of that into account. And what I've learned is that the biggest issues are communication cost versus productivity increase. These are the two knobs that are constantly at odds with one another. And which, by the way, is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about artificial intelligence and why I think that there's so many interesting opportunities here. That as you add an additional person into an organization, productivity will increase by 1 over n at most, right? I now go from 1 person to 2 people, productivity doubles, but then at that point, you go from 2 to 3 people and it only increases by another 2/3. Each time it gets a little bit less. And yet communication costs, every time I add a new person to the conversation, we're increasing by a factorial. Go from 0 to 1, now it's going from my corpus callosum to another human being. That's a slowdown. Then you go from 2 to 3, and now there's 2 more people that each of us have to talk to. And then 3 to 4, there's 3 more people for each of us to talk to, and so on. It seems like human beings tend to break out into a couple of really clear areas where we need to then change the way that the organization works. From 1 to 2 is the single biggest change, right? Where you actually need to have some idea of organization. Then from 2 until about 8, I call this the 2 pizza team that Jeff Bezos used to talk about, this idea of a small group of relatively heterogeneous individuals, but you're all working on your individual things. You can all sit down at a dinner table or a lunch table together, have a quick conversation, and everybody goes off and does whatever they need to. Communication stays at a relatively small cost, and you get a lot of stuff done. Something really interesting happens around 8 to 10 people. And you start to not being able to do those things. Meetings start taking a long time. You can't just have everybody going around the room. You start getting some dissension. Things start to break up. So very often that will fall into what I call little red schoolhouse, which is you have some departmentalization going on. And so devs are now working with devs, and the sales folks are kind of working with the sales and marketing lead. The CEO is hovering, helping out everybody who needs help. You get a customer support person. And now you start to break those communication barriers. I'm talking with my team most of the time, and then I'm occasionally talking with members of the other team. And that works really great up until about 16, 17 people. And you start to find that it starts to break down, certainly by the time you get to about 20. From 20 to 60, I've seen this happen over and over again in organizations. I call this the death zone. When you get to about 55 or 60, something really interesting happens in that you start to be able to do more than one thing well. Up until that point, you can do one thing really well and you're trying to do two things, and you end up at odds. Things break down because there's a missing layer of middle management, of tribal knowledge. You've got an executive team and then individual departments, and you don't really have enough people to break into different P&Ls. You're stealing from Peter to pay Paul. You're trying to do two things. Somewhere around 55 to 60, this amazing reconnection happens where there's a layer of secondary leadership, right? You'd call them director level, where now all of a sudden you can get initiatives done. You can do more than one thing at a time. And that from 60 to about 120 scales amazingly well. You just continue to grow each of those different pieces. And now you can do 3 things, 4 things, 5 things, or you can do 2 or 3 things, but you can do them really, really well. Or you can break up into P&Ls, and this group does one thing really well, this group does one thing really well. And then maybe there's like an accounting function that brings it all together. Now I'm going to talk about that 20 to 55. I've seen that kill so many promising young companies, because when you're at 15 or 16, you're thinking, oh God, if I only had, like when I hired 3 or 4 more people, we were able to get more done. So I'm going to hire 3 or 4 more people and we'll be able to get more done. And then you realize, no, now I've got to onboard all of these people. In fact, everybody's productivity goes down. So you think maybe it's bad hires. And then you hire a few more people, and before you know it, you're at 25 and you're going slower than you'd ever gone before. It's remarkable how quickly you can lose $1 million every month. The salaries and all of those expenses continue to increase, and you tend to be hiring relatively senior people. It just becomes something that if you don't have the operational efficiency, right? This was my big experience. When you get to about 15, 16 people, if I don't have my business fully understood down to the level of like, how much revenue per employee are we making? And what's the addition of one new employee going to do in terms of the number of customers that we can bring in, or the amount of expense that we're going to save? And I'm not keeping an eagle eye with my controller or my VP of finance or my CFO on what each of those new expenses bring. My head of marketing is saying, I need 1 person. My head of sales says, I need 2 people. My head of engineering says, I need 2 people. It's the onesies and twosies that make you feel like, yeah, we just need to get there. That stuff is where really understanding your business and making sure that you're bringing in the revenue necessary as each new individual gets hired, up until you get to about 55. When you hit 55, those new operational efficiencies come into play again. That's why I always warn the companies that I advise and help them out with. It's like, if you haven't gotten your business figured out by the time you're 15 or 16 people, and you think that just adding a few more people is going to make the difference, you're sorely mistaken. You're well on that road. It's a lot harder to pivot when you're at 15 or 16 than it is when you're at 8, Try to figure out what your business is, how that business physics works, how you get customers, how much it costs. Then at 120, there's another interesting thing that happens, which is you hit the Dunbar number, the total number of weak connections most people can keep in their heads.
Forgetting people's names and stuff like that.
Yeah, or you actually don't even recognize them. And they work at your company, and you're like, I think I've seen them before. And here's where you start to get sales versus marketing versus finance versus devs, all of the political stuff that happens. We're all working at the same company. Why are we fighting with each other? Well, because you've hit that 120 number, and now not everybody can know everybody anymore. And unless you're like Bill Clinton, there are certain people who can remember everything, but you can't build a company like that based on those individuals. And so this is where companies like 3M and other organizations, what they'll do is they'll say, look, as soon as you get to about 120, cut the company in half, right? Create two different divisions, create two different P's and L's, like have one team do only the East Coast, one team do only the West Coast. Like you've got to rebuild around those organizationally efficient strategies. And you have to change the way as a CEO or as an executive, you can no longer lead by personality alone. Mark Pincus, the founder of Zynga, said that once you hit about 1,000 employees, even you as the founder and as the CEO, you realize that you're boxed in a cage. You don't have the kind of control that you had anymore. And he's absolutely right. At that point, you have to lead by incentive systems, not by personality. You can have values. Values are super important for building a company and maintaining integrity and honesty. But at some point, values are just things on a wall if you don't enforce them. You build those organizational methods is through setting the right incentives for how these different pieces of your organization are going to be incentivized to make sure that they're actually adhering to the kinds of values and customer focus that you want. So it becomes a whole different chess match, right? Once you get beyond that 1,000-person number.
Yeah, entirely different games. I'm curious, practically speaking, how do you think that AI kind of upends this? I mean, I think there are probably a lot of ways that it upends this, right? I get the sense that there's probably some sort of death valley of companies that were too far along before AI came along, where it's going to be hard for them to actually integrate it. Because everyone will talk about the AI transformation. I want to do the AI transformation. But then when you actually get into the nitty gritty of it, what it requires is a huge amount of training. Even if you have really smart people, you tell them how to use AI, they're not necessarily using it the right way. I think this is something that I don't necessarily see discussed, but right now, the people that are actually leveraging AI in the true force multiplier are predominantly early adopters who have spent a lot of time sparring with it over the last year or 2 years, who really know, I'll use this model for this, I'll use that model for that. This is how I load the context. This is how I write the prompt. And so I see this in our little company where I'm constantly pulling team members over as I'm working on something so that they can watch how I go about it. What I'm getting at is if you're starting a company today and you're able to find 2 or 3 of these kinds of people who have that approach in their different disciplines, someone that's going to do marketing and someone that's going to do sales and engineering or whatever it is, and you are from day 0 building the company in that way, you are going to build a fundamentally different company from what you would have built pre-AI. The hiring decisions will look entirely different, right? Things that used to take a huge amount of time that would lead to management and mid-management layers, such as scope. What do mid-managers do all day? I think a lot of people actually don't know. What does a manager or a director level person do? They spend a lot of time talking to employees, telling them how to do stuff and writing out SOPs. Now, someone that knows how to use AI well can just click a button with Super Whisper and walk around their office for 5 minutes, brain dumping what work they want to have done. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, and then they got to spend a little time refining it. But there is no arguing, because I'm doing this all day long. I use AI to delegate to people who I wouldn't have otherwise been able to delegate to. It is very good at bridging these gaps. I have no engineering background, but now I'm doing this. Like I have an engineer who's helping me with just spinning up an MVP of something. And he asked me, what should the user roles be inside of an app? I don't know. I've never done this before. Well, you tell me, what should the user roles be? And then I just did exactly what I hit the button, super whisper, start chatting with it. We need to have this app for client facing delivery. I need to be able to have my team log in and do back end stuff. And I need to be able to have client admins who can see all the client stuff, but there need to be other people who can only see their thing. The first pass of this thing was, to me, pretty passable. Drop this in a doc and you delete the hyphens and the little lines that make it obvious that it's AI and get rid of the emojis and whatever. And I send it to the dev and I'm like, is this what you need? Exactly what I'm looking for. Fantastic. And it took me 3 minutes. So anyway, point I'm just getting at is talking about these breakpoints in the company growth. Is that even what a company is it even going to be, is there going to be any resemblance to that? Because you start to see, oh my God, if I had 20 people in a room who were working in this way, the amount of work that could get done would be insane. And then to your point, there's probably some equilibrium and optimal team size. And now you can keep the organization lean enough that you don't have these sort of catastrophic communication drop-offs. What do you think that looks like as you look at building Warm Start and building a company in this space and looking forward a couple of years?
Yeah. First off, there's a really interesting observation that early on in my career, the idea that it's a measure of status, the number of people who work for you. And then you manage or lead a team that has over 100 people in it, and you realize, oh my God, this is like the worst curse that I could have ever asked for.
Yeah, and it's such a farce. Like, okay, if that's the status symbol, I'm just going to go spin up a bunch of fake LinkedIn profiles or hire a bunch of employees to do something.
It's not because people are bad, evil, or incompetent. First of all, the level of things you're asked to weigh in on, because if you've done your job well, starts to become more and more around things like HR and legal and the really tough, complicated things that people were able to solve it in the organization. And if you've done your job well, they'll solve it in the organization, right? You start getting these really complicated, thorny problems that look very different from the reason why I intended and started out on the business in the first place.
That wraps part one with Dave Sifry, and we're just getting started. Next episode, we're diving even deeper into what it really takes to build billion-dollar companies in an AI-driven world. Dave breaks down why old-school metrics like headcount are already outdated, reveals how lean, AI-native teams can redefine scale, and shares the specific skills entrepreneurs should be mastering today. Make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit like if this got your gears turning, and I'll see you in part two.